I had gotten used to eating alone. I was not expecting company. You learn the geography of a feast when you are the one person no one will sit beside. The high table on its dais, gold and antler, and the king at the centre of it, like the sun deciding where the day goes. Then the long tables, ranked outward by blood and standing, warmth thinning as you go, until you reach the cold far end by the scullery door where the draught lives, and the last bench, and me. 23 years old, a woman grown by any pack's law, with a chipped wooden bowl and a heel of bread and a great deal of practice at looking at neither. They had a name for me, though they were too well bred to use it to my face. The Ashmere girl. The last of the oath-breakers. My pack had been broken and scattered before I had all my teeth, branded traitors in a single season, their lands carved up, and their name made a thing you spat. I do not remember the crime. I was too small. I remember only that I ended here, in the hall of the Alpha King, scrubbing his pots and eating by his scullery door, which the court found very funny and very fitting. I could have run. I want that understood, because everyone who tells this story later makes me a stray that wandered in out of pity. I had 2 good legs and 20 chances. I stayed for one reason, and it is the only thing my mother left me. I was the last person alive who remembered that Ashmere had a hearth song. If I left, there would be no one in the 7 Valleys who still knew the tune. And then it would be as if we had never warmed our hands at anything. So I stayed, and I scrubbed, and at the feasts I sat in the cold and I hummed it under my breath, very quietly, where no one could hear me be guilty of remembering. That was what I was doing the night the king moved his table. Humming, eyes down, minding the one thing that was still mine. The noise in the room changed first. A feast has a sound, a steady roar of 300 wolves eating and boasting, and I had learnt to live inside it the way you live inside weather. So when it faltered, when the roar dropped to a murmur, and the murmur to a hush, table by table, rolling toward me like a tide going out, I felt it before I understood it. I kept my eyes on my bowl. In my experience, when a room goes quiet around the Ashmere girl, the next thing that happens is rarely kind. Then a shadow fell across my bread, and I looked up, and the Alpha King was standing over me with his own plate in his hands. I want to describe him honestly, which means I will not tell you how my heart behaved. I will tell you what I saw. I saw a man who could order the death of anyone in that hall, holding his own supper like a kitchen boy, which kings do not do, which I had never once seen done. I saw, behind him, his entire court caught halfway out of their chairs, the high lords, the dace, the gold, frozen in the act of realizing their king had stood up, and walked the whole length of his own feast, past every soul who outranked me, which was everyone, to the cold bench by the scullery door. "This seat," said the Alpha King. "Is it taken?" It was not a question the way other people ask questions. It was a question the way a key is a question to a lock. No, it was true, and my voice was the only thing in that hall not shaking. "It is never taken, Your Grace. That's rather the point of it." Something moved at the back of his eyes, there and gone, like a fish under ice. Then he sat. The King of the 7 Valleys sat down on the cold bench at the far end of his own hall, set his plate beside my chipped bowl, and looked back over his shoulder at his frozen gaping court with an expression of mild, terrible patience, as if to ask what they were waiting for. They came. Of course they came. You do not leave your king eating alone by the scullery door, even when he has put himself there on purpose, even when the only other person at the table is the last of the oath-breakers. So they came, hauling benches and platters and their own appalled dignity, the whole glittering high table dragging itself down to the cold end after him, until the warmest place in the room was suddenly, impossibly, the place I was sitting. His great grey wolf padded down last and lay across my feet like a hearthrug with opinions. "Forgive me," the king said, very low, only for me, watching his court rearrange the entire architecture of the feast around a scullery girl. "He has decided he likes you. I am, as you can see, not consulted." And there it was. The wolf. The answer the whole hall would reach for. The answer I reached for too, because it was the only one that made the world keep its shape. The beast had taken a fancy, and a king indulges his wolf, and that was all this was. I believed it for 3 weeks. I want to be honest that I believed it, so that when I tell you what was actually happening, you will understand that he is very, very good at being underestimated, and that I, who had built my whole life on not being fooled, was fooled longest of all. Your wolf has worse judgment than your court, and your court tried to have me whipped for using too much firewood in January. The king of the 7 valleys looked at his plate to hide his face, and did not quite manage it, and that was the first thing about Alaric that I kept. You can imagine the court did not take it well. The Dowager Lady Estrid took it worst, and she mattered most, so let me tell you about her. She ran the hall the way the king ran the kingdom, absolutely, and through everyone else's hands. She decided who was received and who was cut, whose daughter danced near the dais and whose did not, and she had decided about me a long time ago. Her late husband had been the lord who broke Ashmere. Their fine new lands, their fine new name, the very days her grandchildren expected to marry on to, all of it was carved from the carcass of my pack. She did not hate me because I was low. She hated me because I was proof, walking around her hall with her crime's only surviving eyes. She came to the scullery the next morning, which great ladies do not do. Exactly the way trouble always arrives in stories, out of its proper place. "You will refuse him," she said. No greeting. She did not sit. There was nowhere she would have sat. The next time the beast drags him to your end of the room, you will plead a fever, you will keep your eyes down, and you will make yourself so dull and so cold that even an animal loses interest. You are a novelty. Novelties end. The only question is whether you walk out of this hall on your own feet when it does, or whether you leave it the way your pack did. And how was that, my lady? I kept my hands in the wash-water. It hides a great deal, wash-water. I was very young. I'm told the official version is treason. I've always wondered who wrote it. Her face did something I would think about for a long time afterward, a flinch so fast it was almost not there, the flinch of someone who has just felt the floor they are standing on. Remember, it is a trapdoor. "Careful, girl," she said softly. The last family that got curious about old paperwork lost its name, and its lands inside a single season. I would hate for history to find itself so fond of repeating. She left, and I stood there with my hands going cold in the water and understood that I had touched something with a nerve in it, and that the something was not me. That was her first move. It would not be her last, and the second one nearly worked, but I am getting ahead of the wolf. Because the wolf, the king, did not lose interest. He got worse. Things began to arrive at my end of the hall with no explanation, and the king's bland insistence that the beast was responsible. A fur for the cold bench, because the scullery draught was unkind. The wolf had dragged it there, apparently, in his great concern for my circulation. A second candle for the dim corner where I mended by night. The wolf again. A known lover of good light. Once, an entire small honey cake set beside my bowl with enormous ceremony, which the king swore on his crown the wolf had carried the length of the hall in his mouth, untouched, a feat of self-control no honey cake had ever before survived in the presence of that animal. The thing about the honey cake was the plate. It came on a small dish of ashmery green, the deep moss glaze my pack had been known for, that no one had made in 20 years, that had been smashed or melted or buried with everything else of ours. I had not seen that colour since I was a child. I sat in the cold by the scullery door with a stranger's kindness going to ash in my mouth, and I thought, a wolf did not find that. A wolf does not go into a locked room and choose the one dish in the 7 valleys that would stop my heart and carry it out to mean something. A wolf cannot mean, only a man can mean. So I went looking, the way I find everything, which is by being somewhere I was told not to be. It took me 4 nights. The king kept a room off the old library that the household called the Cold Archive and avoided, because it had been his father's, and his father was not a man anyone missed warmly. I had a scullery girl's keys, which are the best keys in any castle, because no one thinks to change the locks the help already hold. And on the 4th night I let myself in, and I found what the wolf had supposedly been doing for years. It was ashmere, all of it, everything the season of breaking had scattered, gathered into one cold room and kept, our green dishware stacked like saved teeth, our hearth banners folded, our pack rolls, our oath ring on its iron stand, and on a long table, in a hand I had watched sign death warrants from across a feast, the records. Not the official version, the true one. Letters, ledgers, a confession, 2 decades old, naming the lord who had forged Ashmere's treason to take its land, and the dead king who had let him, and the price of moss-green dishware in the year my pack stopped existing. Alaric had been assembling the proof of my pack's innocence, piece by buried piece, for longer than I had been scrubbing his pots. It had never been the wolf, not the fur, not the candle, not the cake on the green plate. It had been the king, every time, with his own 2 hands, choosing each thing and then standing in front of his whole court and blaming the animal so that no one, so that not even I, would ever make him say it out loud. "You weren't supposed to find this for a while yet," said his voice from the doorway. He did not sound angry. He sounded like a man who has been holding his breath for years and just felt someone notice. I did not turn around. I had a letter in my hand with my mother's name in it, alive on the page, accused of nothing. "You let me think it was your wolf." "Yes, for 3 weeks you let the whole hall laugh at the beast that liked the scullery girl. You carried your own plate down that room like a fool, so they'd all be too busy gaping at the spectacle to ask the only question that mattered, which was, why?" Now I turned. "Why, Alaric? Not the wolf. You, why does the king of the 7 valleys spend 20 years in a cold room mending a pack that everyone he rules would rather stayed broken?" He came into the room. He did not cross to me. He stopped a careful distance off, the way I would learn he always did, leaving the space between us as a thing I could close or not. Because my father broke them. And I was a boy, and I watched, and I said nothing, because that is what boys with cruel fathers learn first. His jaw worked. And because a king cannot afford to want things, he can need them. Need can be argued to a council. Want cannot. So I told my council I was correcting an old administrative error. I told the court my wolf had odd tastes. I told myself I was repaying a debt of honour. The grey wolf leaned into his leg, and he put his hand in its fur without seeming to know he did it. I have been lying to everyone, healer of nothing, scrubber of my pots, for a long time. The wolf was the kindest lie I had. A king's beast may want a scullery girl, and the court only laughs. A king may not, and the court sharpens its knives. He looked at me, and the fish under the ice came up and stayed up. I did not move my table for my wolf. I have wanted to sit at your end of the room since the first feast I heard you humming a song that has been illegal to sing in this hall for 20 years. I simply needed 3 weeks to be brave enough to carry the plate myself. I should say something here about how I felt. I will not, because the cap on what a person can stand to feel and still speak had been reached. And what came out instead was the truth, which is usually what is left when the feelings run out. Don't. The word came out flat. Don't tell me you've been quietly saving my dead in a cold room and expect me to be grateful. I have been offered the powerful's kindness before. It is what they hand you instead of the thing they took. You want to mend, Ashmere? Then do it where it counts. In the hall. In the light. With the court watching, and your father's name on the wrong side of it. A truth kept in a locked room is just a nicer kind of grave. I put my mother's letter down very carefully because my hands wanted to shake and I would not let them. I don't want your secret. I want my pack's name said out loud by the man strong enough to say it. He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "That will cost more than you know." It always does. That's how you tell it's worth saying. Something in his face came apart and did not put itself back together, and I understood that I had stopped being the underestimated one in the room. Let me catch my breath here, because the quiet part of the story ends about now, and the loud part is coming, and before it does, I'd love to know whether you'd have believed the wolf as long as I did. Or whether you saw the king's own hand on it sooner. Tell me in the comments, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read every one. If hers is a voice you want more of, subscribe, and the next one will come find you. All right. Lady Estrid understood it too, faster than either of us, because people who built their houses on a buried thing can always hear someone walking toward the grave. She made her real move at the naming feast, the great one, when the 7 Valleys lords gather and the king speaks the year's judgments before them all. It was where Alaric had decided to do it, to lift Ashmere's name in the light, with the proof on the table in front of the very court that had eaten off our stolen plates. She knew, of course she knew, she ran the hall, and she got to the cold archive before we did. I found the door open and the long table bare, the letters, the ledgers, the 20-year confession, gone, every page, into a fire I could still smell. She had burned the proof, and she had done it cleverly, because now, when the king stood before the lords and named Ashmere innocent, he would have nothing but his word and a scullery girl's grief, and a dowager ready to weep that the poor besotted king had been worked on by the Oathbreaker's last witch until he would shame his own dead father for her. She had not tried to stop the truth. She had arranged for it to sound exactly like a love-struck lie. It very nearly worked. Standing in that emptied room with the smell of my mother's burned name in my throat, I believed for one cold minute that it had. But she had forgotten what I stayed for. She had burned the paper. She had not burned the song, because you cannot burn a song that lives in the only throat that still knows it. And she had not burned the oath ring, because it was iron and old, and the one thing in that room a fire would not take, and an Ashmere oath, sworn on Ashmere iron, is a thing the old law of the Pax still holds true above any lord's paper, if the one who swears it is willing to pay what it asks. So when the naming feast came, and the king rose to speak, and Lady Estrid arranged her face into its first soft note of pity, I stood up first. A scullery girl does not stand at a naming feast. The hall turned to me the way it had turned the night the king moved his table, that same tide going out, and I walked up the long room between the staring lords with the oath ring in my hand, and I did not look down. Because I had spent 20 years looking down, and I had decided I was finished. The proof you were going to hear tonight is ash. My voice carried down the whole assembled court. I made it carry. Lady Estrid burned it this morning. She'll tell you the king invented it for love of me, and that is the cleverest thing she has ever done, because it means the harder he fights for the truth, the more it looks like a lie. I held up the iron ring. So I will not give you paper. Ashmere does not need paper. We have iron, and we have the old way, and the old way does not care who holds the lands. I put my hand into the oath ring, and I closed my fist around its inner edge, which is ground to a blade, because that is the price the old oath asks, that the one who swears the truth of the dead open her own hand to do it, so that no one swears it lightly. The iron bit. The blood came hot and certain over the cold metal, and the old magic in it woke the way deep cold wakes. A pressure that climbed my arm and pressed the air from my chest and tried to find a single false note in me to break the oath against, and found none, because I have never in my life learned how to lie, and on that one night it saved me. I am Sable of Ashmere. My voice did not shake, and the ring grew warm with the truth of it, the way it has woken for true sworn oaths for 1,000 years. Last of a pack that broke no oath. We were sold for moss-green dishware and a stretch of good river land by the house that is weeping at your high table. I swear it on the iron, with my own blood, in the old way no fire can burn, and I will sing you the song they made illegal so you would forget we ever had a hearth, and you will all of you hear that traitors do not sing about lighting a window for a long road home. And I sang it, the Ashmere hearth song, in the cold king's bright hall, the tune my mother left me, and I had hummed alone by the scullery door for 20 years, out loud, at last, in the light, with my blood on the iron, and the whole court too stunned to stop me. The old wolves in that room knew it the way old wolves know things in their spines, and I watched the truth land in them, because a hall full of predators can smell a true sworn oath the way you can smell rain. Then the king of the 7 valleys did the most expensive thing I have ever watched a proud man do. He stepped down from his days, his father's days, built on my pack's bones. And he came down the long room, and in front of every lord in the 7 valleys he went down on one knee to a scullery girl with a bleeding hand, and he said, loud enough to carry to the cold far end where I used to sit, "She is true sworn, and the iron has answered her, and any wolf in this hall who doubts it may doubt me, here, now, on my feet, and we will settle it the old way too." He looked up at me. Ashmere broke no oath. The crime was my father's house, and the house that profited, and I have the names, and I have had them for years. And I was a coward who kept them in a cold room and blamed his wolf rather than risk my crown to say them in the light. His voice did not rise. It never has to. I am saying them now. Lady Estrid, of the house that ate Ashmere, stand and answer for it. She did not answer well. People who have built everything on one buried thing rarely do when the grave finally opens at a feast. I will not give you the long unwinding of it, because the warm part of this story is not the part where the dowager's house came down. Though I confess I have replayed the look on her face more times than is good for me. It is enough to say that an oath sworn on the iron, witnessed by the 7 valleys and answered by their king on his knees, is not a thing even the cleverest lie survives. Her house was stripped of the name, and the lands it had taken, both restored, on the spot, to the last of Ashmire, which is to say to me, which is a sentence I still cannot say without laughing in the wrong register. She was sent to live out her years on a poor holding at the cold edge of the territory by the scullery door of the kingdom, and I am told she has not adjusted to the draft. And the king, still on his knee, with his court rearranging itself for the second time around the place I happened to be standing, asked me the question he had spent 3 weeks and a locked room and 20 years failing to ask. "I will not offer you a use," Alaric said, "not a restored name, not a luna's seat, not a debt repaid. Those are things you are to other people. I am asking, as a man with no wolf to hide behind and no counsel on earth able to justify it, whether you would let me be simply indefensibly glad of you. In the light, where I should have been from the first. His mouth did the thing it did. You may still say no. You have earned every no in the 7 valleys. I am only asking you to want to say something else. So I said something else. I will tell you only that the kiss was not careful, and that it was the first thing in 20 years I reached toward instead of bracing against, that something I had been holding since the cold far end of 100 feasts finally set its weight down, and understood that being wanted in the light is not the same as being kept in a cold room, however kindly. Then I stopped keeping the record. That part is mine. It is a year on now, and the hall has had to learn some things. It has learned that the moss-green dishware is back on the high table, made new by a potter I found in the hills who is the granddaughter of one of ours, so that we eat off our own colour again in the open. It has learned that the Queen of the 7 Valleys came up from the scullery and has not developed the slightest talent for forgetting it, and says exactly what she thinks, usually at the formal moments, which the court has decided to survive. It has learned the Ashmere hearth song, all of it, because Alaric had it copied into the hall's own book of feasts with my name beside it. And now 300 wolves sing about lighting a window for a long road home, and most of them have stopped finding it strange. A letter came in the spring from a holdfast 3 valleys east, a man who had heard, the way news finally travels, that the Ashmere song was being sung again in the king's own hall and the moss green back on the table. He signed it with a packmark I had not seen since I was small, and he asked, carefully, the way you ask a thing you are afraid to want, whether it was true that one of us had lived. I wrote back that 2 of us had now, and that there was a green plate waiting whenever he could make the road. He came at midsummer, with his daughter on his shoulders. It turns out I am not the last of anything anymore, which is a sentence I had not let myself imagine in 20 years of humming alone. The great grey wolf still lies across my feet at every feast, smug as a paid matchmaker, taking credit he is owed exactly none of. I let him. He kept the king's secret for 3 weeks. The least I can do is let him keep the glory. There is a bench at the cold far end of the hall, by the scullery door, where the draught lives, and no one would sit with me. I had it kept. The court thought I would want it torn out, the seat of my long humiliation, and could not understand when I refused. But I sit there still, some quiet evenings, on purpose, with the king of the 7 valleys hauling his own plate down the whole length of the room to join me the way he did the first night, because we both know what that walk cost and what it bought. I had gotten used to eating alone. I was wrong about the company. So tell me, would you have believed the wolf as long as I did? Or did you see the king's own hand on it before I let myself? Be honest. Tell me in the comments, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read every one, all the way down at the warm end of a hall that used to be cold. If you want to be here when the next one finds her voice, subscribe and pull up a bench. There's room now. Moon and iron. Her side of it, all the way through.